In the 1320s, the Ottomans were still a small but rapidly growing frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia. Their territory was limited, their army was not large. Standing against them was the Eastern Roman Empire, a power with centuries of history behind it. Yet within roughly 40 years, the situation would change completely. Bursa, Nicaea, and Nicomedia would be conquered. The Ottomans would gain control over the southern shores of the Sea of Marmara. The first organized military units would be established. The first Ottoman madrasa would be opened. Coins would be minted. And for the first time, Ottoman soldiers would establish a permanent base on the European continent. At the center of this extraordinary transformation stood Orhan, the son of Osman Ghazi. His father had laid the foundations of a principality. Orhan Ghazi would begin transforming that principality into a true state. The exact date of Orhan Ghazi's birth is unknown because there are very few contemporary sources from the foundation period of Ottoman history. Different accounts exist regarding his early life, based on references describing Orhan as a valiant young warrior in 1299. Historians suggest that he may have been around 18 years old at the time. According to this estimate, Orhan may have been born in the early 1280s. His father, Osman Ghazi, was the founder of the Ottoman Principality. However, there is no clear agreement among the sources regarding the identity of his mother. Orhan spent his youth in an extremely turbulent environment, shaped by frontier warfare. On one side, the Ottomans were advancing against Eastern Roman fortresses. On the other, they were defending their lands against rival powers in Anatolia. Orhan became involved in these struggles at a young age. In 1299, when Osman Ghazi moved his administrative center to the area around Beylik and Yenişehir, he sent Orhan to Karahisar, together with the experienced warrior Gündüz Alp. This assignment involved far more than simply remaining in a town. Karahisar was strategically important for the security of the Eastern Ottoman territories. It had to be defended against possible attacks from the Germanids and the forces allied with them. In this way, Orhan began taking on both military and administrative responsibilities while he was still young. In the early 1300s, Orhan began appearing in the campaigns organized by his father against the Eastern Roman Empire. He is believed to have participated in the Siege of Nicaea and the Battle of Dimbaz. However, the first major operation carried out under his own command was the campaign into the Sakarya region in 1305. Osman Ghazi placed some of the most experienced warriors of the principality under his son's command. Akçe Koça, Konur Alp, Ghazi Abdurrahman, and Kose Mihal, who had once served as a local Eastern Roman governor before becoming one of Osman Ghazi's closest companions in arms. Orhan's mission was to capture the fortresses located along the roads leading to Nicaea. With the capture of the fortresses of Karachipush, Karatigan, and Absu, the area surrounding Nicaea gradually began to fall under Ottoman control. At first glance, these conquests may appear minor. However, the Ottoman strategy was highly calculated. Instead of attacking a large and heavily fortified city directly, they first captured the smaller fortresses surrounding it, cut off its supply routes, and placed the city under long-term pressure. Orhan would later use a similar strategy during the conquest of major cities such as Bursa, Nicaea, and Nicomedia. One of the most important Ottoman targets was Bursa. Bursa was one of the Eastern Roman Empire's major cities in Anatolia. It had strong walls, a large population, and a developed economy. During the reign of Osman Ghazi, the city could not be captured through direct assaults. Instead, fortresses were built around Bursa. The roads leading into the city were brought under control, and a long siege began. However, Osman Ghazi became seriously ill during the final years of his life. The task of completing the conquest of Bursa now fell to Orhan. After years of Ottoman pressure, the city became unable to receive outside assistance. Realizing that continued resistance was no longer possible, the governor of Bursa began negotiations for surrender. In 1326, Bursa fell into Ottoman hands. This conquest became one of the most important turning points in Ottoman history. Bursa was not merely another captured fortress. It was a major city, an important commercial center, and a developed center of production. The Ottoman Principality was becoming something far greater than a small frontier community. Bursa was made the center of Ottoman administration. Mosques, public kitchens, bathhouses, inns, and madrasas began to be constructed throughout the city. The complex established by Orhan Ghazi played an important role in the urban development of Bursa. According to Ottoman tradition, Osman Ghazi died before he could witness the conquest of Bursa. Orhan fulfilled his father's final wish by having him buried in the Gümüşlü Kumbet in Bursa. Bursa therefore became not only the new administrative center of the state, but also one of the spiritual centers of the Ottoman dynasty. For many years, historians offered different interpretations regarding the date when Orhan took control of the principality. Today, however, based on documents identified by Halil İnalcık, it is generally accepted that Orhan assumed power around March 1324. Osman Ghazi is also believed to have died sometime between 1323 and 1324. There is no reliable evidence that a major struggle for the throne took place when Orhan took control. Ottoman chronicles state that no conflict occurred between Orhan and his brother, Alaaddin. According to the traditional account, Orhan offered to divide the principality with his brother. Alaaddin refused and supported Orhan's right to remain the sole ruler. The details of this account come from chronicles written in later periods. However, it is known that Alaaddin Bey held important responsibilities during Orhan's reign and contributed to the development of the Ottoman state structure. Orhan was no longer merely a warrior. He now had to establish institutions capable of governing the expanding territories, regulate revenues, recruit soldiers, and create permanent administrations in the newly conquered cities. The loss of Bursa was a serious blow to the Eastern Roman Empire. However, Nicaea and Nicomedia were still under Eastern Roman control. Nicaea, in particular, was a city of great importance in Christian history and was protected by powerful walls. The Ottomans had already kept the city under siege for a considerable period. In 1329, Eastern Roman Emperor Andronikos III crossed into Anatolia in an attempt to relieve Nicaea and halt the Ottoman advance. The Ottoman and Eastern Roman armies met near Pelekanon in the region located between present-day Kocaeli and Istanbul. Orhan positioned his forces on high and rugged ground. Instead of confronting the Eastern Roman army directly, he attempted to draw its soldiers out of their strong defensive positions. On June 1st, 1329, Orhan sent a force of approximately 300 men toward the Eastern Roman lines. The Ottoman warriors approached, fired their arrows, and then withdrew. This was not a disorganized retreat. The aim was to lure the Eastern Roman soldiers into pursuing them toward the rugged terrain where the main Ottoman forces were waiting. On the first day, the Eastern Roman army did not fall into the trap. However, the fighting intensified the following day. During the battle, the Eastern Roman emperor was wounded in the leg. Rumors that the emperor had been killed caused panic throughout the Eastern Roman army. The soldiers began retreating toward the coastal fortresses, while the emperor was transported back to Constantinople by ship. The Battle of Pelekanon demonstrated that the Eastern Roman Empire's attempt to stop the Ottoman advance had failed. After this battle, the possibility of the Eastern Romans providing overland assistance to Nicaea was largely eliminated. Following the defeat at Pelekanon, Nicaea had little hope of receiving outside assistance. After a long blockade, the city surrendered to Orhan Ghazi in 1331. Orhan followed a careful policy toward the population that surrendered, especially by the standards of the period. The lives and possessions of those who wished to remain in the city were protected. Those who wanted to leave were allowed to do so. This approach was not merely an act of mercy. It also demonstrated that the Ottomans preferred to preserve the population and economy of the cities they conquered rather than leaving them deserted. Nicaea became a cultural center for the Ottomans as well as a military one. Orhan Ghazi founded what is generally regarded as the first Ottoman madrasa in the city. Davudi Kayseri, one of the leading scholars of the period, was appointed as its first head. This development was extremely important. The Ottoman administration was no longer focused solely on conquering territory. It had also begun educating the people who would establish its own system of learning and law. After Nicaea, the next target was Nicomedia, one of the Eastern Roman Empire's last important centers on the eastern shores of the Sea of Marmara. Nicomedia was conquered in 1337 after years of Ottoman pressure. With the capture of Bursa, Nicaea, and Nicomedia, the Ottomans gained control over much of northwestern Anatolia, the region historically known as Bithynia. The southern and eastern shores of the Sea of Marmara were now under Ottoman control. These conquests transformed the small frontier principality into a major regional power. The importance of Orhan Ghazi's reign was not based solely on military conquest. The most significant transformation was the gradual development of the Ottoman administration into a more organized state structure. During Osman Ghazi's reign, tribal forces and volunteer Ghazis gathered together in times of war. However, as Ottoman territory expanded, this system began to prove insufficient. The Ottomans needed disciplined soldiers who could participate in regular campaigns and operate under established rules. For this reason, military units known as the Yaya and Musellem were formed during Orhan's reign. The Yaya served as infantry, while the Musellem served as mounted troops. These soldiers received payment during wartime and cultivated land assigned to them during periods of peace. These units should not be confused with the later Janissary Corps. The Janissary organization was not created during Orhan's reign. It would be established during the reign of Murad I. Nevertheless, the Yaya and Musellem units represented one of the first forms of organized military structure in Ottoman history. Administrative institutions, such as the Office of Vizier, the Judiciary, and the Imperial Council, also became more clearly defined during Orhan's reign. Judges were appointed in major cities, such as Bursa and Nicaea. A more organized system was established for collecting taxes, supervising markets, and administering justice. The minting of silver akçe coins in the name of Orhan Ghazi was also significant as a symbol of sovereignty. Having the Friday sermon delivered and coins minted in a ruler's name were considered among the most important signs of political independence. The Ottoman Principality was no longer merely a force made up of warriors gathered around Osman Ghazi. It was becoming a state with an administrative center, an army, officials, educational institutions, and an organized economic system. In order to move westward into Europe, the Ottomans needed more than the conquest of Eastern Roman cities. They had to reach the Dardanelles and the Gallipoli Peninsula. At this stage, the Karesi Principality became extremely important. The Karesids ruled over the regions surrounding Balıkesir and Çanakkale. They possessed soldiers with naval experience and had access to maritime forces. When a struggle for power broke out within the principality, Orhan Ghazi intervened. Dursun Bey asked Orhan for assistance against his brother, Demirhan Bey. As a result of the conflict, much of the Karesi territory passed into Ottoman hands. The exact date of this process remains disputed. It is believed that the Karesi lands were gradually incorporated into the Ottoman realm between 1345 and 1354. The annexation of Karesi was the first major incorporation of another Anatolian principality into Ottoman territory. More importantly, it gave the Ottomans access to the shores of the Dardanelles. Commanders from Karesi, including Haçı İlbey, Evrenos Bey, and Ese Bey, would later play important roles in the Ottoman conquests in Rumelia. The Ottomans now stood directly across the water from Europe. In the middle of the 14th century, the Eastern Roman Empire entered a devastating civil war. Factions competing for the throne began seeking military assistance from outside powers. One of the leading figures in this conflict was John Kantakouzenos, an important statesman of the Eastern Roman Empire. While fighting against his rivals, Kantakouzenos first received support from Umur Bey of Aydın and later from Orhan Ghazi. Orhan's involvement in the Eastern Roman Civil War was not limited to sending soldiers. He also formed a political alliance with Kantakouzenos by marrying his daughter, Theodora. Through this alliance, Ottoman forces crossed into Thrace on several occasions and participated in the internal wars of the Eastern Roman Empire. These campaigns allowed Ottoman warriors to become familiar with the geography of the Balkans. They learned the crossing routes, the locations of fortresses and cities, and the political balance of power in the region. At first, Ottoman soldiers entered Europe as allies of the Eastern Roman Empire. Before long, however, they would begin establishing territories of their own. The first permanent Ottoman base in Europe was the fortress of Çimpe. Sources provide different accounts of exactly how Çimpe came under Ottoman control. According to some accounts, Kantakouzenos gave the fortress to the Ottomans as a reward for their military assistance. Other accounts suggest that Ottoman forces captured it directly. What is certain is this: by the early 1350s, the Ottomans had established a permanent base on the Gallipoli Peninsula. This base made it much easier to transport soldiers from Anatolia into into Rumelia. However, the greatest opportunity appeared in 1354. On March 2nd, 1354, a powerful earthquake struck the region. The walls of many fortresses in and around Gallipoli collapsed, and part of the local population abandoned the towns. Ottoman forces under the command of Orhan Ghazi's son, Süleyman Pasha, occupied Gallipoli and the surrounding fortresses, which had been left largely defenseless. Eastern Roman Emperor Kantakouzenos demanded that the Ottomans withdraw from the region. He even offered money in exchange for the return of the fortresses. However, the Ottomans refused to leave. Turkish families were brought from Anatolia and settled in the region. This was not a temporary military raid. The Ottomans were now permanently established on the European continent. Gallipoli would later become the main crossing point for Ottoman expansion into the Balkans. One of the most important figures in the Ottoman expansion into Rumelia was Orhan Ghazi's eldest son, Süleyman Pasha. Süleyman Pasha played a major role in the administration of the Karesi region and in the capture of Gallipoli. He was also considered one of the strongest candidates to succeed Orhan as ruler. However, in 1357, he died unexpectedly. According to the sources, Süleyman Pasha died in a riding accident near Bolayır. His death was a devastating blow to the elderly Orhan Ghazi. Although the Ottoman advance in Rumelia slowed for a period, it did not come to a complete halt. The settlement policy begun by Süleyman Pasha continued, and Gallipoli and its surrounding territories remained under Ottoman control. Orhan's other son, Murad, would later take command of the campaigns in Rumelia and become the new heir to the Ottoman throne. By the final years of his life, Orhan Ghazi had reached an advanced age. He had ruled the Ottoman territories for nearly 40 years. When he first took power, the Ottomans were a small principality struggling for survival around Bursa. By the end of his reign, Ottoman territory extended from Bursa to Nicomedia, from Balıkesir to the region around Ankara, and across the sea to Gallipoli. Orhan Ghazi died in 1362. He was buried in Bursa, in a structure located near the tomb of his father, Osman Ghazi. He was succeeded by his son, Murad I. Murad did not inherit merely a small Anatolian principality from his father. He inherited a state with organized military forces, a state capable of governing major cities, a state with established economic and administrative institutions, and a state that possessed permanent territory in Europe. Osman Ghazi was the founder of the Ottoman dynasty and the Ottoman Principality. However, founding a state required far more than raising a banner or capturing a few fortresses. For a political entity to become a true state, it needed an organized army, administrators, a legal system, reliable sources of revenue, and educational institutions. The first strong foundations of these structures were laid during the reign of Orhan Ghazi. The conquest of Bursa gave the Ottomans a major capital. The victory at Pelekanon broke Eastern Roman resistance in Anatolia. The capture of Nicaea and Nicomedia transformed the Ottomans into one of the strongest powers in the Marmara region. The incorporation of the Karesi Principality opened the road to the Dardanelles. Çimpe and Gallipoli marked the beginning of nearly 5 centuries of Ottoman presence in Europe. Orhan Ghazi was not simply a ruler who continued the movement begun by his father. He was the ruler who institutionalized a small frontier principality, connected it with major cities, and laid the foundations of a state that would eventually stretch across 2 continents. For this reason, Orhan Ghazi can be regarded not only as the second ruler of the Ottomans, but also as the second founder of the Ottoman state. What do you think was Orhan Ghazi's greatest achievement? Was it the conquest of Bursa, Nicaea, and Nicomedia? Was it transforming the Ottoman Principality into an organized state? Or was it beginning the Ottoman rise in Europe? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Chronora to continue exploring the states, rulers, and defining moments that shaped world history.